So you're a smart business committed to innovation, to service and to modern marketing, and you're asking, what's next? Wondering how you can become even more innovative. My name is Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and this is the InnovaBuzz Podcast, where we share all kinds of tips, advice and interview guests on all things innovation and leadership in modern marketing. Hi there, innovator. I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and today on episode 201 of the InnovaBuzz podcast, I wanted to share with you some reflections as I look back on 200 episodes of the podcast. It is great to be back with another episode, and I hope you've had an awesome week so far. I certainly have. I trust you've enjoyed our most recent interviews too. Episode 199 with Jules Brooke of Handle Your Own PR, and episode 200 with Neil Sperling, the world-class connector and problem solver. As with all other episodes, these were just wonderful conversations with so much value there, and I hope you enjoyed them. Today's episode is brought to you by the Transformational Marketing Hub, where you'll find a host of free and exceptionally useful information to help you transform your marketing. You can access the hub by visiting innovabuzz.co/VIP. If you're already a member, just log in to get your resources, and if not, it's free to join, so go check it out. There are so many things to reflect on over the 4+ years that we've been running the InnovaBuzz podcast and the past 200 episodes. I often get asked, what's your favourite episode? And for me, I don't really have a favourite episode. There are so many highlights. We've had so many wonderful guests on, and each and every one of them providing great value to me and, I hope, to you, my listener. I'm really grateful for those guests, and of course I'm grateful to you, my listener, for spending time with me each week. I know I'm in your ear, and I hope that I add value to your week. I'm also grateful to my support team who do so much work behind the scenes to produce the podcast, to get it published every week, to produce the show notes and all the other bits and pieces that go into making this the podcast that it is. So thank you to them as well. And it really is a great privilege to tap into so many experts in their field, and also to be able to share their knowledge and their insights with you. Remember, you can access any of the past episodes of the InnovaBuzz podcast by going to InnovaBuzz.com. You'll find show notes there as well, so if you're new to this podcast, that's where you can listen in on previous episodes, and as I say, there are so many wonderful episodes there, basically 200 of them. When I first started this podcast way back in August of 2014, so almost 5 years ago, it was intended to be part of my marketing strategy. And of course, as part of my marketing strategy, it was important for me to start to build my networks and build connections. And it certainly has provided that for me. So I started out by reaching out to the people that I'd worked with in my corporate career that were doing some amazing things, doing some innovative things in their particular careers at that time, and have them on the podcast and share their stories with you and their insights. And then I started to build connections to new people and have been introduced to some wonderful guests along the way and built some wonderful relationships. So that's one of the things that's come out of it for me, is developing relationships with many new people and being able to showcase their innovations as well. Back in the early days of my career, I was in photographic research, and this was in the time when film photography was still the mainstream for the consumer. And in the early days of my work, the digital photography revolution was born. And I remember the company I was working for kind of at first starting to go into panic mode around the advent of digital photography, but then deciding that the very early prototypes of the digital camera were very poor in quality of the photographs that they produced, which certainly was true. But they decided that this wasn't going anywhere, this particular innovation. And at the time, I was one of the few voices in the company that said, wait a minute, this is proof of concept and it's likely to be developed further if it has legs. And I certainly thought that there was merit to the idea. And of course, what happened was, as we all know, film photography virtually disappeared from the mainstream of the consumer photography, and companies like Agfa, Kodak, and Fuji to some extent either disappeared from the scene or had to reinvent themselves and go into totally different businesses. So for me, that story and that experience highlighted that innovation was always key. As a business, you always need to be aware of what's happening in your field and in other fields and be ready to innovate, respond to what innovations are coming into the marketplace from other people, but also be prepared to make your own product or service redundant by innovating and iterating the next evolution of those products or services. So that was certainly something that to me was a bit of a theme that I wanted to explore further in the podcast, and it was one of the criteria that I use and still do for selecting the guests to come on the podcast. Over the course of the years, of course, the building new connections, new relationships with people led to business, and also relationships with listeners also provided business. So as a marketing strategy, the podcast has turned out to be really successful. Now, we've had a lot of amazing guests, as I mentioned. I'm not sure of the exact count because some of the 200 episodes were indeed solo episodes and reflections on Model the Masters as well. So just at a guess, there's probably about 185 or so guests that we've had. A few of them have appeared a couple of times on the show, which has been a great privilege for people that to have people want to come back a second and a couple of them even a third time. So it's really fabulous because to me, having a guest on is like a masterclass in a specific area. And typically the interviews or the conversations last about 45 minutes. So I feel as though I'm having a masterclass from an expert in their field for 45 minutes, a very specific coaching thing. And I don't have to pay for it, which is kind of a bonus, of course. But the other thing that to me is wonderful is that I get to share that expertise, that masterclass, back with my audience. The other thing I've been really working hard on over the course of these 200 episodes is on my own development as an interviewer and a presenter of the podcast. One of the things I want to do is present information that perhaps hasn't been presented before or in a different way from my guest. And so I like to ask different questions than the typical questions that they might have been asked on other podcasts. I like to dig deeper into specific areas. Sometimes the conversation will go off on a tangent from where I'd actually prepared to take it, but other times we dig really deep into one specific aspect. And what I like to do is understand the strategy that the guest applies to their area of expertise and understand that in a way that we all might be able to apply their strategies and their success strategies to other businesses. One of the things that I really want to do in every interview is to make sure that my guest is at ease and feels comfortable and can then show up for the audience to be at their best. And I'm really delighted that Neil Sperling, who was my guest in episode 200, provided that feedback to me, that that was indeed what I did for him, and also that he really appreciated my preparation for the interview, the skillful questions that I asked, and the thoughtful, incisive manner in which I was able to drill down and get to the subtle truth that he was able to pinpoint and really get some exceptional insights into his thinking and his contribution to the world that enables you, the listener, to really benefit from his experience. So thanks for that feedback, Neil, and I don't mean to blow my own trumpet here, but I'm really pleased that my interviewing skills are improving all the time, and I always look for feedback from my guests. So we have conducted most of the episodes as interviews. Now, I don't really like to think of them as interviews, even though that's kind of the label that we apply to it, but really it's a conversation that I have with my guests. And of course, I ask them a lot of questions and explore ideas and explore their expertise, and really as a conversation. I have done the odd solo episode, and it's interesting that solo episodes I find quite challenging, and here I am doing a solo episode. So it's a stretch for me because I've got to imagine somebody that I am speaking to rather than the conversation with a guest where I have someone I am speaking to. So this is a challenge for me, and I'm realizing that challenge even more because I've moved my solo episodes and ideas that I have around marketing to a new show, which is called Tales of Marketing Transformation. So go check that one out, talesofmarketingtransformation.com. And as I move forward with that one, which is currently about at episode 7, so as I move forward with that one, I'm hoping that my skills at doing solo episodes will improve just as my interview skills have. I've also done a few episodes which I called Model the Masters, a special series, and the Model the Masters, the idea behind that was to analyze the strategies and beliefs and practices of the master in the particular field that I was exploring, and to learn from that, because we all learn fastest by modeling somebody else, modeling a master. And the idea behind that was definitely to analyze a master in their field so that we can learn from that, rather than the InnovaBuzz standard format, which is to explore a specific topic with my guest. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about the future of the InnovaBuzz podcast and where Model the Masters might fit into that in a moment. But I just want to talk about the process. There's quite a lot of moving pieces that go into producing this podcast, from finding and inviting guests and building a relationship with them to the point that they are happy to come on the podcast, to have a conversation with me, to feel comfortable in doing that and in sharing their expertise. Then, of course, we have to schedule a guest and find a mutually convenient time to conduct the interview. And as many of my guests are spread all over the world, it does become a little bit more of a challenge to fit in with time zones and make sure that we're not expecting somebody to get on the podcast interview at some really crazy hour, like middle of the night. I do take a great deal of effort to prepare my guests so that when they do come on the show, that they know what to expect, they know what questions I'm going to ask, even though a lot of it will be a conversation that may go in any direction. But they know the standard questions I'm going to ask. they're comfortable with the whole idea, they've had a chance to listen to previous episodes, and they have some guidelines as to what to expect and also about the technology to connect with me. Then, of course, there's all of the recording, producing and editing of the show that happens after we've recorded, and show notes and blog posts are produced. And then we do a lot of follow-up with our guests, which is important to me because I want to build on the relationship that I've started by being introduced to them and having that conversation. And then, of course, we do a lot of promotion of the podcast episodes so that we continue to grow our audience. Now, it's really important. I mentioned before, I'm grateful for the team I have supporting me. It's really important that when you're running a podcast that's as involved as this one, that you have help. And I really appreciate my editors and producers that I've had over the 200 episodes, Althea Branosa and Mavis Kazali. So thanks, guys. It's been a blast over the 200 episodes working with you, and I look forward to many more episodes as we move forward. So speaking of moving forward, what is the future of the InnovaBuzz podcast? I intend fully to continue interviewing guests on the podcast, interviewing wonderful guests, and I'll mention later on what some of my ideal guests are. But moving forward with the podcasting itself, I will be, as I said, doing Tales of Marketing Transformation as a solo podcast. I'm planning on resurrecting Model the Masters. It's kind of gone into hiatus at the moment, but I am looking at resurrecting that and perhaps having it as its own podcast as well later on. But it may be another year or so before I get to that, because we are doing lots of different things in terms of helping our own clients get started with podcasting and managing their podcast with us. So if you want help with that, then get in touch with us later on. I'll explain how you can do that. And also, if you have specific guest suggestions for us, I'd love you to get in touch with us and let us know that also. Now, I thought it was a good idea to talk about the Buzz, which is our innovation round. So the Buzz is designed to help our audience, and they're primarily innovators and leaders in their field, with some tips from the experience of our guests. So there's 5 questions I always ask, and I thought it'd be good to reflect on some of my favourite answers. Not really favourite answers, but kind of a bit of a snapshot of the themes that have come back from those questions. So the first question is, what's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative? And the things that I've taken out of that really resonated with me, and I think are wonderful suggestions, are things like reading and reflection, even to the point of allowing yourself to daydream, because it kind of clears your mind and allows some ideas and thoughts to bubble up from the unconscious that might form the basis of innovative ideas. The other ones I really like are spending time in nature and exercise, and they're things that I love to do anyway, so maybe that's why they resonate with me. And the other one that I've found really valuable, and I have started doing actually as a result of many people suggesting it in the podcast, is journaling, taking time to actually sit down and write on paper with a pen your thoughts and explore those in some more detail, which is a really good way of self-reflection as well. The second question that we ask in the Buzz is, what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas or new products? And many of those answers tend to be related closely to what I've just mentioned in answer to the first question. But one of the ones that I really thought stood out for me as a wonderful way to look at new thoughts, new ideas, and challenge how you thought about your own industry is to look at industries outside your own. How do they do things? What do they do? And understanding their strategy and seeing what might be able to be applied to your industry. So kind of a looking outside the box idea, but in a very practical way. The third question we use is what's one of the resources you use most often? And of course, this is feeding my shiny object syndrome. And there are so many suggestions here, but I certainly encourage people to take those ideas with a grain of salt. Don't get distracted by them, but it's really information, and sometimes I learn about new products or new services, and that's always interesting. But as I say, don't get distracted by them from your main purpose. Some of the guests give us really good big picture answers, like the internet being a resource that they use most often, pen and paper, and a whiteboard. And of course, all of those things we tend to sometimes take for granted. Sometimes we ignore that we can use pen and paper just to jot down ideas and plan things out in this day and age of technology, and similarly with whiteboards. So there's certainly things to keep in mind that are available to all of us and can add value. And of course, doing research on the internet and finding knowledge that way is just, we live in an amazing age to have that available to us. The fourth question we ask in the Buzz is, what's the best way to keep a project or a client on track? And my wrap of that, the typical answers are around, first of all, setting expectations, then about having really good communication. And the other one that I really like is a couple of guests have suggested, pick your clients well. And of course, to me, that says work with your ideal client, because your ideal client is the one that will keep the project or client on track, will allow you to work with them to set expectations that are mutually beneficial, and will have really good communication with you. So I really like that suggestion as well. And the fifth and final question of the Buzz, the innovation round, is what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves? And so many guests here say, be yourself, which is quite easy to say. And of course, that does differentiate you. I like a couple of guests have expressed it in kind of this way, which is you see the world differently than anybody else, and you can create value in a different way than anybody else. So understanding what drives you, knowing what makes you unique, and what your true purpose is, that's the key to unlocking being really differentiated. So reflecting on all the experiences that you've had and not taking any of them for granted. So I know I often take things for granted that I've experienced and think that maybe those experiences are not of value to other people, but they are. They're of unique value to other people. So bring that value to your clients and to your audience. So I really like those takes on that fifth question. So another question that I ask every guest, of course, is who would you like me to interview on a future InnovaBuzz podcast, and why? So in kind of this section, which is about the future of the InnovaBuzz podcast, I'll share with you some of the guests that I'd like to have on. And there's three that are very high on my list, and they are Seth Godin, who's a marketer extraordinaire and multiple best-selling author and just an amazing all-round guy. So I'm really keen to have Seth on at some point. Elon Musk, to me, is another extraordinary person, an innovator of massive proportions. So I'd really love to talk to him about all the stuff that he's doing and his approach to innovation. And likewise, Sir Richard Branson. So those three are my kind of dream guests, but of course they're very high-profile guests. I'd also like to get people on who are, let's call them unsung heroes. So people that are doing some amazing things but aren't as famous as those three, but they're doing some amazing things and they have some skills and insights and knowledge to share with me and, of course, with my audience. So I'll be looking out for those people, and I'll mention a couple in a moment as we wrap this episode up, because they're coming up on the next episodes. So, in conclusion, I hope you've enjoyed those reflections, my reflections on 200 episodes of the InnovaBuzz podcast. And of course, I hope you've enjoyed the episodes to date and look forward to being with you again for the next 200 episodes. I'd certainly love to know some of your favourite takeaways from the InnovaBuzz podcast over the past 200 episodes. And of course, I'd love to get your feedback on the podcast in general, on how I'm doing as a host. And if you have any guest suggestions, guests that you'd like to hear me talk to, then please leave a comment below the blog post for this episode, which you can find at innovabiz.co/reflections200. That is REFLECTIONS and the numbers 200. All lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/reflections200. Now, if you want help with your podcast or setting up a new podcast or managing your podcast guests, then do get in touch with us, and you can send us an email at podcast@innovabiz.com.au. That's podcast@innovabiz.com.au. We have the system, we've got the processes, and we've got the people to help you. So do get in touch if you need help. And of course, tune in again next week to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we've got more fantastic guests lined up, including Facebook and Instagram ads specialist Monica Louie and Mother of Marketing's Sarah Allison. Stay connected. Subscribe to the InnovaBuzz podcast so you'll make sure you'll never miss another episode. Head on over to innovabiz.co/subscribe. We'd also love you to leave us a review, because what you think matters to us. Take some of the ideas you've heard today and apply them in your business. Any thoughts, ideas, suggestions, or questions, then share them in the comments below the blog post. And remember, if you want to get better marketing results than you ever have, join our fantastic Facebook community at the Tales of Marketing Transformation Facebook group. All you have to do is go to innovabiz.co/TMA. It's free to join. I hope to see you there soon. Until next time, I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBiz. Remember to be awesome and keep innovating.